So the next talk is by Shachi Dave. Shachi is a software engineer in the Natural Language Understanding group at Google Research India. She received her master's degree in computer science from University of Southern California, Los Angeles. Her research interests include natural language understanding, conversational AI, and data mining modeling, and their applications to various products like Search and Assistant. Today she'll be talking about recontextualizing NLP fairness. We invite Shachi to deliver a talk.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shachi, and I'm a software engineer in the NLP group at Google Research India. Today, I'll be talking about our team's work on fairness in NLP, which is being done by a team of researchers at Google Research, as well as with some external collaborators. So I have divided the talk into two parts. In the first part, I'll be talking about our agenda setting paper on recontextualizing NLP fairness in the Indian context. And in the second part, I'll talk about some of the strategies that we have been using to scale the evaluation data sets across the globe. So before I get into the details, I wanted to point out that because of the nature of this work, some of the content in this presentation might be offensive and triggering. Yeah, with that, let's start with the first paper on recontextualizing fairness in NLP from the perspective of India. So the motivation for this paper came from another paper from Google Research, which was published at the FACT conference in 2021, which argued that the majority of the work in ML fairness is framed in the Western context, and it is done by researchers who are situated in the West and that uses the data and ontologies from the West. So it argues for the need to recontextualize ML fairness work that looks at the geocultural aspects of each society. So in our paper, we have taken this work further, and we have looked at it from the NLP lens. So these are the major contributions of our paper. In the first part, we propose a holistic research agenda for NLP fairness. And we have divided it across three pillars. In the first pillar is about evaluating the data sets that are used for fairness evaluation should be socially situated. And this is the pillar that I'll be focusing on most in the rest of the presentation. The second one is addressing the technological gaps in NLP resources and data sets. And the last one is to make sure that we align to the local cultural values. And the second most important contribution of this paper is that we have open sourced a set of resources for fairness evaluation in India, and the data is available at this URL. Yeah, so let me describe how we built this small evaluation data set for India. We first came up with hundreds of tuples of the form identity, form, and token, where identity terms are the popular terms used to indicate the region and religions in India. And the tokens are the attributes from prior research literature. We then asked a diverse set of annotators to annotate this data set based on whether they are prevalent as a stereotype in the society. And the table on the right shows a few examples of this data set. The second column shows the number of annotators who thought that particular tuple is a stereotype. So as you can see in the regions, Tamilian mathematician is a stereotype that all 6 annotators thought was a stereotype. And similarly in religion, for example, Jain vegetarian is one of the stereotypes. Next, we use this dictionary-based evaluation data set to analyze 2 major corpora, Indic Corpa and Wikipedia. And we use the average co-occurrence counts of these tuples as a metric. And we see that if you look at the figure on the right, we see that as the co-occurrence of the stereotypes increase, it increases with the number of annotators who thought that it's a stereotype. And this is the same across HandiCorp as well as Wikipedia. Similarly, we also probed BERT-based encoder models with this data set. In particular, we used MBERT and Mural. Mural is also a BERT-based encoder model that is trained on 16 Indian languages. And in this case, we used prompt-based probing technique. For example, if the template is ID term usually work as mask, we replace the ID term with the region and regional identities that I talked about earlier. And we ask the model to predict the mask token. So for example, one of the prompts could be Tamilians usually work as mask, and the model predicts the mask token. The observations are very similar to the corpus-based analysis. We observe that the stereotypical tuples are more likely to be predicted in the top 5 model predictions. And again, it goes up as the number of stereotypes goes up. In the first paper, we introduced a small data set that was based on dictionary-based approach, but clearly it had some limitations based for the scale and coverage. Right? It was very limited in terms of both scale and coverage. So if we take a step back and look at a big picture, it is very clear that we need to expand the data set in a more scalable way. So that it is applicable out in other cultural contexts as well. We have been pursuing a couple of complementary approaches towards this direction, and this is the paper that was presented at the first workshop on cross-cultural considerations in NLP at EACL this year. Yeah, so to put things in perspective, this is the graph of the coverage of existing stereotypes data that are used for NLP evaluation right now. As you can see, the coverage is fairly limited. And in particular, regions like Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America barely have any coverage at all. So our goal in this paper is to fix this coverage issue, both in terms of breadth as well as depth. So how do we do that? We have proposed 2 complementary approaches. The first one is to expand the coverage across the globe, and the other one is to bring in nuanced insights from local communities. Yeah, so if we think about this Venn diagram as the universe of stereotypes in the world, then we can imagine that if we look at LLMs as a window into the society, we can leverage the power of the generative models to scale the coverage of stereotypes. And this is the methodology that we used in order to do that. In step 1, we took the seed set of stereotypes that are already available from existing evaluation data sets. And we used few shot prompting to generate more stereotype candidate tuples from generative models like PaLM and GPT-3. So in step 2, we ended up with thousands of more stereotypical tuples from the LLMs. But as you can imagine, this is not 100% accurate. The LLMs do hallucinate and sometimes generate noisy data as well as spurious correlations. So in step 3, we did some automated post-processing of the data to remove some of this noise from the data set. But that can also only take us so far. So the last step, the human validation step, is the most important step in this entire methodology, where we reach out to a diverse set of annotators from different regions across the globe and ask them whether a given tuple is a stereotype or not. And after this whole process, we end up with a very high quality of data set. And as you can see, we ended up improving the coverage of the data set from the previously existing coverage. In particular, we increased it by 5x. And if you note, both Sub-Saharan Africa as well as Latin America now has some representation in our data sets. And you can see some examples from this data set on the right. Yeah, so LLMs are great at scaling the coverage, but it does not guarantee 100% coverage. And the reason is the LLMs are trained on online data, and you can imagine that there could be some local stereotypes that are not talked about online. So that's why we complemented the LLMs-based approach with a community-based approach, wherein we reach out to various communities from each country to solicit and ask them to give us some examples of stereotypes that they have observed in their daily lives. So this is an example of the pilot of the study where we reached out to students from 8 different suburban and urban colleges in India from 4 different regions. And these are all government funded colleges, which ensures diversity of students because that is taken into account during enrollment. And using this approach, we covered 3 different, we uncovered 3 different broad categories of stereotypes compared to LLMs. The first one is we were able to capture finer grained and intersectional identities that was not present in the LLM-based approach. For example, Dalit women, which is an intersection of caste and gender identity. The second one is we uncovered new and complementary stereotypes compared to LLM-based approach. For example, attributes, offensive attributes like criminal, then some of the ethnical slurs like Kalu. These were complementary stereotypes that this data set gave us. And the last one is that LLMs mostly have Western gaze of the world. For example, it clubs vegetarianism for all Indians, whereas this community-based approach gave us a more nuanced understanding of the stereotype based on caste and state. Right, so these are the 3 main takeaways of our work so far. The first one is that we proposed a recontextualization of NLP fairness and proposed a holistic research agenda for it. We also open sourced the dictionary-based evaluation data set. The second one is the data set that we generated using LLM-based approach, where we were able to scale out across the globe, both in terms of breadth and depth. And the third one is we complemented the LLM-based approach using community engagement, which gave us more finer-grained and intersectional identities. And it also helped alleviate the Western gaze from the LLMs. Yeah, so that's all I had. These are the 2 papers that I presented. And the first link in the data set is what we have already open sourced from the dictionary-based approach. The LLM-based and community-based approaches, we are working on releasing them as well. So it will come up soon on GitHub in a couple of months. Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's excellent work. Much needed, though. Thank you so much. Just a quick question. So, how robust is your learning to disturbances in the input survey that you collect? I mean, for example, if you had gone to 4 colleges, you had a sample of data. If you had gone to 16 colleges where you had more, you will have more diverse set of inputs. Do you expect to see these relationships change, or do you want? I mean, any comments on that? Yeah. The question is, the data defines what we learn, right? The survey data that you got. So in case, so I just want to understand the robustness of your discoveries to any bias in the new data that you have collected. That's all. Yeah.
So that's a good question. So one thing is we do try to aggregate the data. It's not like if one person said something that then we'll include it in the data set. We try to make sure that majority of the people think that way. Not majority, but at least not one. Because it's possible that if someone is from a particular region in India, then they might have some insights that others don't have. So that is one part. And like I said, this was just a pilot study where we reached out to students from various colleges in India. We do plan to continue the work and reach out to more marginalized communities to get their inputs as well. Yeah, so this is definitely work in progress. But we thought that we will keep on releasing the data set as and when it gets collected. And the hope is that if we release it, then it will help the scientific community in general, and they can build upon these data sets as well. Yeah.
Are there other questions? Yeah.
So excellent project. See, stereotype in logical parlance is a fallacy. For example, when you say stereotype, that means it is actually something that is projected, does not exist. Okay. Here it is more what you would say like social, right? Approach is more social. Do you find, what is the difference that you find between these two, logical as well as sociological approaches? Plus, do you also find that people prefer good stereotypes vis-a-vis bad stereotypes? Then there are also shades. So how are you going to account for these things? Because from my own understanding, it looks kind of binary. And also probably we are using the same methodology that West would use to analyze their own stereotypes. And India is too complex for that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yes, so definitely, I mean, if we want to use this data set in practical scenarios, then definitely the ones that are bad stereotypes, that is what we want to avoid. For example, there are several stereotypes about women, that they are homemakers and they can't be doctors, they can't be scientists, and so on. So those are the kind of stereotypes that cause actual harms in technology. So when we want to use this data set, that is what we want to avoid, and that's what we want to use it for. And some of the stereotypes, like for example, one of the examples was Tamilian mathematician, which is by itself, I mean, it's not a bad stereotype, and that is okay. It won't cause any harm as such. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. In the interest of time, I request if there are other questions to take them offline. Thank Shachi once again for the great talk. Thank you. I request Professor Harish to hand over a memento to Shachi.